A shape, E chord, pentatonic, and major scale position 5, or A shape, E chord scale positions. And get ready, because it's time to rock and or roll. Here we are in our worksheet. Remembering we have the top string on top, that being the low or heavy E, string closest to the ceiling, the high E on the bottom, string closest to the floor, the 0 representing the open frets, the one which, if indicated, we wouldn't be putting our fingers on, but instead ringing out as open. Frets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on are the frets we would be putting our finger down, fingering them if indicated in this case by the orange items on down below. We're now looking at the A shape in an E chord position, recapping what we looked at last time, scrolling back up to the A in the open position, which is our common position we would be used to seeing it in, and we would just be fingering these items. Oftentimes we would be doing so with our smaller fingers, pinky, ring, and the middle finger, or you might just use one finger to finger it. We note that the A here, the open string in this case, would be the one that we want to see as the root. We have another A here, but we'll typically be eyeing this one as the root, which is useful given the fact that then we can move up the fretboard and we can then see that and use that as our anchor. As we move this position up, we then could simply finger these three still, and that would give us a nice voicing. But if we wanted to use the bar chord, which this is very common to do, you do want to learn the other fingering of that, which would be to put the pointer finger here, and typically your ring finger would be borrowing this. Some people might use their pinky to borrow here, and that's a very common voicing, and it's really a useful tool to have. But even if you don't have that voicing, you could just put your index finger here, and that would still be another way to voice this and move up. However, as you do so, remember that you want to look back and say that this is going to be a B now, and you can anchor by this item here, which will be easy for you to do if you're playing the actual bar chord, because you'll be pointing to it with your pointer finger. But if you're playing just something other version than like just your three fingers here, then you still want to be able to look back there and say that is where my anchor is. That's how I know this would be a B. Moving up here to the C, noting that you could move to a C sharp. We're just not doing that here. We're just going to move it up to the D, and then we're now moving it up to the E. You could move it up to a D sharp, but we're going to move up to the E here. So now we have the same fingering in the E, which you have that nice bar chord that you could be using, or you could just be fingering these items to ring out that E as well. So the E is another one that it's a bar chord, so it's a useful tool if you're kind of going up and moving up and down the neck with this type of bar chord. That's going to be a very common usage of it. You can also just be using these three notes if you're voicing something a little bit differently. If you have someone playing the E in the open position, you got that heavy E over here. So then if you're accompanying that or something, or if you want to put a variant on a song that sounds a little bit different, then you can basically jump up here. This is one way you can change things up and play the E over here with the bar chord or some variant of it, which can give a lot of a different feel while still playing the same progression. So it's really nice to be able to experiment with those types of things. That's how you can make things kind of your own, doing some of that kind of more experimentation. You can also, of course, use this then to arpeggiate as well as you're playing along with the song too. So if we go to the right, look at our theory here. We're now looking at the E. If we map out from E to E and we do our whole half thing, we'd go from E, whole step to F sharp, whole step to G sharp, half step to A, whole step to B, whole step to C sharp, whole step to D sharp, and then half step back home to E. If we map that out, or if we show that here, then the notes in the entire major scale would be E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, and then back to E, back to the 1, numbering 1 through 7, back to the 1. If we construct our chord, we're skipping every other one, the 1, 3, 5, which would be E, G sharp, and B. Therefore, we should be fingering here E's, and then B's, and then G sharps, and there's another B. So clearly we have more than 3 notes here if we were to finger the entire thing. Oftentimes, if you're using the bar chord, you'd be fingering this, and then these 3. This one would probably be muted most of the time on down below. or you might be getting that, you might be hitting that with your bar chord. It might be somewhat muted oftentimes if you're fingering that, but depends how strong your bar is. And so in any case, then you can also voice this a little bit differently down here. You can ring out different voicings as well, so you don't have to see this. You're not required to play this as a bar chord. You're not going to say, well, this is a major bar chord, I have to play the bar chord all the time. You don't. You can put your 3 fingers here if you want. You can put your index finger here. You could do different variants on it, adding more notes if you so choose. And generally the reason this one wouldn't ring out may not be because your bar is heavy here, but because your bar here will typically be muting it a little bit. But in any case, let's go ahead and add then the pentatonic over the top of it. We're going to unhide some cells to see the pentatonic unhide. And so now we're looking at that position 5 now. So now you can use this shape to name your pentatonic scale in that position. So you might say, okay, this is an A-shaped chord, which you might then call an A-shaped pentatonic, right? You're going to call this your A-shaped pentatonic scale, meaning A shape in the open position, A shape typically referencing just the orange items, which are really only 3 notes, pentatonic position, because now you're adding then the other notes over on top of it, and that's one way that you can basically see where you are in the fretboard. So you're going to say A shape, the thing you're not saying, but it's in your head when it's in the open position, and then you're going to say E chord, because you're fingering that item, you know it's an E because that's going to be your root. Pentatonic shape, because now you're saying it's the other notes around it are going to be in the pentatonic. So if you're up here and you move your A up here, you can say, okay, now I'm in my A shape. If it was in the home position, I know it's an E chord because there's my root on the E, which I'd be pointing to if it was going to be a bar chord. And I know that the pentatonic position around an A shape would then be adding these notes around it in that similar shape or the same shape. And so that would be my A shape, E chord, pentatonic position. So then you can, of course, add those to accentuate different voicings of the chord that you're playing, and or you can then play along with a song and try to experiment around or of adding more notes than just arpeggiating the chord, adding the pentatonic. Then you can go and expand the major. So you might call this then the A shape when it's in the home position, E chord, because I know my root is here on the E, major scale position, right? So it's an A shape position, A shape when it's in the major, when it's in home or open position, major scale position. But now it's in the E chord. So if you're playing your A here, you can say there's my A, and I know it's an A shape if it were in the open position, but it's an E here because that's my root. And then I'm going to say it's a major, then I want to think it's going to be a major scale position, meaning I'm adding the relative notes around that position. And now I've got more notes that I can now experiment expanding on beyond. Now, if you were then to look at our theory here, we could say, okay, there's the 3 notes for the chord. You can add the 5 notes then for the pentatonic, 7 notes then for the major scale. If you were to build a song in the key of E, you can name these notes 1 through 7, and you would typically be picking E would be major, the F sharp would be minor, the G sharp would be minor, the A would be major, the B would be major, the C would be minor, the D would be diminished, and you typically drop it off. If you were doing the 1, 4, 5, it would be the E, A, and B. If you were trying to use this position then, and they were playing the 1, 4, 5, E, A, and B, then you can try to use this position and basically experiment with arpeggiating, then adding then to the 5 pentatonic, and then adding the full major scale along all 3 1, 4, 5 chords in the song. And then you can experiment with moving your shape. Of course, you can move it back to the A position and the B position as well as you're progressing, through the song. And you can use that same shape to try to follow along as the chord changes take place. So those are, and then of course later you can try to think about different shapes and how to move the shapes, as we talked about, some of the shapes thus far. We'll talk more about the shifting of shapes in the following section.